Well, it's good to be back. As Mike said, you can open your Bibles. We'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And man, it was like 18 months ago, like January of 2020, I stood up here and I said, hey, it's the year of fear and the age of anxiety. And 18 months later, which feels like 100 years later, here we are. And the gospel is the same. Not one thing about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus has changed in the last 18 months. Lots of things have changed in our lives, but that one thing remains the same. Lots of things have changed in our lives. Personally, we have moved on. We're in Connecticut. We're starting the work of planting a church. We are glad to be back, grateful to be back, but we found as we've begun over this last month talking with people about starting a church is a lot of questions, and it kind of fits with your show and tell series here. Why? This is kind of a big question for today. Why is there an aversion to Christian show and tell these days? I mean, like, if you were at school, let's just imagine elementary school, and it's the Christian kids' day for show and tell. It's almost like when the school kids know the Christian's coming to show and tell, they don't come that day. Or they're all busy and distracted. They're not even listening to what it is that the Christian wants to show and tell. Why is there an aversion to Christian show and tell these days? I think part of it is because we've been presenting them with Jesus Poppins. You guys are familiar with Mary Poppins, correct? You know, when a family is in a crisis, Mary Poppins, this mixture of magic and morals, floats into their lives, fixes their house, makes them a nice family again, and then floats away. Until they have another crisis, Mary Poppins returns, and then she comes back, this mixture of magic and morals, song and dance, and she presents them with a new etiquette, a new way to keep house, if you will. Spitspot, you know? I think that people sense when we're coming to them with Jesus Poppins and the Christian etiquette that says, hey, there's something over here. Spitspot, clean it up, make it right. Cheerio, you know, like whatever. We've presented people with an etiquette-based Christianity. We've gotten more concerned with keeping house than we have with being church. We have Jesus Christ, the cosmic King, the conqueror of death, the eternal Son of God, offering us an infinite existence, and we present people with etiquette. Why? That's all I really want to talk about today. Really, there are a couple of things from Ecclesiastes chapter 3 that have anchored our faith, are laying the foundation of our church, and have anchored us in this season of being infinite witnesses. There's three beliefs that I think really come out of Ecclesiastes 3, verses 11 and 14. It says here that God has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, God has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. The author, the teacher, the preacher of Ecclesiastes perceives that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing can be taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him, so that people worship before him. Our witness is birthed in our worship. And if your God is small and finite and etiquette-based, nobody wants to hear about that. 3, unfathomable. It says here that we cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. 3 unfathomable truths that anchor an infinite witness. First, God is making everything beautiful. We looked coast to coast before deciding to move to Connecticut. We looked all over the country. We looked north, south, east, west. We even looked in Canada. And we ended up in Connecticut. You know what we found everywhere? God is doing beautiful things. It's almost like he's tapping us on the shoulder, like, where do you want to do beautiful stuff? There's beautiful things happening right here in Central Illinois. We witnessed it in Eastview Christian Church. We witnessed it down the road at First Christian Church in Clinton in our interim season. God is doing beautiful things everywhere. God has planted eternity in the hearts of people. When you look at a person and you think, oh, here I go, I'm going into that big conversion evangelism conversation. What am I going to pull out of the show and tell bag? You have to remember that God has already planted eternity in their heart. The soil is cultivated, ripe, and ready for good gospel seed to be sown. The problem is not the soil. The problem is we've been giving out etiquette-based seed. Jesus Poppins. And nobody's interested in that domesticated version of Jesus. The third beautiful, unfathomable truth is that God is doing things that last forever. My favorite missiologist, Tommy Nika, says it this way. A lot of people think that the church has a mission, but in reality, it's the mission that has a church. The church universal is doing the work of God, doing eternal, beautiful things. So why do we anchor our witness in something so small? Neither our own souls nor the world we live in resonate with that domesticated version of faith that we're offering people. Domesticated faith. Not deep faith, domesticated faith. It comes from a finite frame. There's an author out there, she tells this story of being at a zoo. It was kind of one of those safari type zoos, and she's sitting there and they bring out this cheetah named Tabitha. Beautiful creature, right? You've seen a cheetah, but you also kind of know like there's something different about a cheetah in captivity. It doesn't look the same. So they bring out Tabitha, and then they bring out this SUV, and they hook this little pink rabbit on the side of the SUV, and then they race the pink rabbit, and Tabitha takes off running full steam ahead, full cheetah power, all her glory going. And finally, at the very end, they stop the car, people are applauding, they throw the little pink bunny down, and Tabitha gets to gnaw at it for a little while, and everybody's like, we just saw a cheetah. But everybody knows that's a domesticated cheetah. So then they bring out Tabitha's dear friend, who happens to be a Labrador. And they tell the crowd, this is how we train Tabitha to do that trick. She's been raised in captivity. This is her best friend, a Labrador. And the Labrador taught her how to chase that bunny. And all of a sudden you realize something happens to us when we're in captivity. Something in us dies. Our identities are fundamentally changed. We're no longer who we really were. We have suppressed our eternal instincts, and we have settled for a domesticated Jesus Poppins etiquette-based faith. And the world isn't interested, and our souls know it. They know it. We're playing finite games. There's an author out there, his name's Simon Sinek, another author named James Carse. They talk about the difference between finite and infinite games. And if you're aware of the work, this is kind of like the TED Talk within the talk. If you're not, this is kind of the synopsis of it. But you can look up finite games, infinite games. They're two different modes of being. And for most of the world, we see a finite frame put into place. The primary objective is to win. There are set rules of engagement. There are governing authorities, officials, and people who moderate the game. There's an oppositional or antagonizing sense between the players within the game. It's a zero-sum game. If one side gains, the other side has to lose. And it operates on the scarcity mindset. We have a finite amount of time. There are a finite amount of points. Almost all of our modern sports are finite games. And the entire American culture is built on finite frames. Competition at all costs, win or die. By all measures, all metrics of war, the United States won Vietnam. We won the finite game of that war. But war is not a finite game. Infinite games operate in a completely different frame. The primary objective is to enjoy and mature. You endure, you continue playing the game. Have you ever played a game and been really enjoying it, and then you lose the game and you lost all sense of enjoyment? You completely negated the entire experience by losing. Have you ever played a game, enjoyed it, and then won? It feels great, right? But you've also negated the experience of playing the game. What you really like is winning. An infinite game, the primary objective is to enjoy it, to mature. It has flexible, maybe a little ambiguous rules. There's open play. Anybody can join, anybody can stop, everybody can start at any time. Your opposition is known as a worthy rival. They're there to propel you into further growth. It operates as a positive sum. Multiple sides can win at any time, and you live in this game with an abundance mindset. I'm telling you today Not that I want you to know all this stuff for a TED Talk or an exam later. I'm telling you that I think our domesticated faith is because we've made Christianity a finite game. The church can't win and the world also win. One of us has to lose. One of us has to lose. And so we begin to view people other than us as oppositional, antagonists, those people. And we do it across the board. And then we have these metrics that we define our successes by. These numbers, these conversions. Do you lose people when they deconvert? These are questions not to solve it for you today, but to say, are we living a domesticated game, a domesticated faith? This is how my friend says it. He says, if you play silly games, you win stupid prizes. But you know what? Jesus says something similar in Mark chapter 8. He said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, to win every finite game and forfeit his soul? The infinite. What does it profit you to gain all the finite things and to sacrifice the infinite? I believe that Jesus invites participation in the infinite. That's what his whole life message and gospel is about. Do you remember? Let's just take a quick survey. Remember when Mary's talking to the angel? What's the first thing she asks the angel when he says, you're going to bear the Son of God? How can this be? I'm a virgin. She's got this finite frame that an infinite God is breaking. Remember when Jesus takes his friends to a wedding in Cana and they fill up all these jars full of water and then they become wine? A finite frame was broken when he did that first miracle. Do you remember when Jesus was walking on water and Peter's like, I wonder if I could do that too? And Jesus is like, come on out and try it. A finite frame was broken. Remember when all the disciples and a huge crowd were looking at just a couple of fish and loaves of bread and then all of them ate their fill and were satisfied? A finite frame was broken. Jesus' whole life and ministry, the Sermon on the Mount, is example after example after example of finite frames being broken because the infinite Son of God had come. And he was about to do this crazy thing that makes no sense in the finite frame. He was about to die. And he told his disciples that in Matthew chapter 16. And Peter rebuked him. Peter's like, you can't die. That's finite. That's the end. And we always get caught up because Jesus calls Peter Satan at that moment. But do you remember what Jesus says after that? Peter, you're not setting your mind on the things of God. You're playing a finite game. Because what I'm about to do is eternal. I am making everything beautiful. I am making everything beautiful. The most finite thing that we all experience is about to be vanquished. You better step behind and watch this go down. You're not setting your mind on the things of God. You're playing silly games. I am making everything beautiful. I have planted eternity in the hearts of people, and I am doing things that endure forever. So, what does it look like for us today? The simple question, the spiritual formation question is my faith deepening or domesticating? Because some people may want to come into your nice, clean house after Mary Poppins has been through and fixed everything up and everybody's in order. Some people might be drawn to that. But this infinite frame invites us into a much deeper faith, the kind of faith that I think we need if we're going to enter today's evangelistic arenas. You cannot enter the race conversation with a domesticated faith. You cannot enter the conversation about human sexuality with a domesticated faith. You cannot enter any of the arenas that matter today with a domesticated faith. It has to be a deep faith anchored in infinite realities. Because people snuff it out and blow you over in no time. They don't even come to your day of show and tell if you don't have a sense of the eternal about you. Deep faith is also what cultivates a more dangerous witness. Deep faith will lead you into the spaces in which you are to bring forth the gospel, to embody it and to speak it, to show and tell it. Deep faith is what leads you there. That's how you find where and who you are witnessing to. Sharing a domesticated faith, I'll just say it bluntly, sharing a domesticated faith is damaging our witness in the world. It's hurting us. So we've got to trade this finite frame, these finite frames, for an infinite frame. If Jesus were here today and he's like, hey guys, show and tell. It's my day. It's the end of the series, so Jesus gets to do show and tell. He'd be like, hey, here's this bag. This bag, imagine it's made of rocks. Imagine it's placed inside a garden. There's a guy named Joseph. He's from Arimathea. He owns it. But when they took my dead body off the cross, they laid me inside this tomb. The Romans certified that I was dead. I had a couple of friends who anointed my body and wrapped me for burial, confirming that I was dead. All hope had been lost. All my friends had been scattered. The authorities were all satisfied. Everybody thought the finite game had ended. And so they rolled this big stone in front. They closed up the bag, and then they put some Roman guards there. And then an entire day passed. The entirety of Saturday passed. And then a little bit early on Sunday morning, as the dawn began to break, I was done with that tomb. The Spirit of God breathed life into me, and I vanquished death. You want something to see? Look at the empty tomb. It's what we've built our entire faith around, that Jesus came to this earth to live and die on our behalf so that he might conquer our finite enemy, death. And the same Spirit that emptied the tomb is the Spirit who empowers the church. The same Spirit. That's what Ephesians 1 says. That's what Paul was writing to the church in Ephesus when he said, there's immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe, toward those of us who now in this day we get to stand. We are the current show and tell. We are the current show and tell. We stand on an infinite reality and bear witness to that reality. We say we believe that there is someone who has conquered death, and the same power that emptied the tomb lives in us. That's the hope of the gospel. That's the promise that we have. That's what it looks like when Jesus plays show and tell. There's a church father, 2nd century Irenaeus. He wrote this treatise called Against Heresies. He was the Bishop of Gaul, which is modern day France. And he says to us, these are the roots of the church, guys. 2nd century, a generation removed from people like the Apostle John. He says, the glory of God is the living man, and the life of man is the glory of God. It's been recalibrated, rephrased a ton to say that the glory of God is man fully alive. The glory of God is humanity living into their infinite reality. We, you and I, we are the evidence of eternity. You, the evidence of eternity. The glory of God. You are the glory of God. I see you are the glory of God, and so are you. You are the glory of God. You are the glory of God. You are the glory of God. We are the evidence of eternity. I feel like Oprah. You are the glory of God. You are the glory of God. You get to be the glory of God. We are the evidence of eternity. The glory of God is man fully alive. So quit trying to get in the bag and domesticate everything and present people with Jesus Poppins and all the right etiquettes. And let's start talking about how God is making everything beautiful. Let's start talking about how God has planted eternity in the human heart. And let's start talking about how God is doing things that will endure forever. This is what Acts 1 calls us to, and Luke's version of the Great Commission. You will receive power. You will be empowered when the Holy Spirit comes. You imagine, we talk about finite frames being broken, Acts chapter 2. You will receive power, men and women, young and old, prophesying, speaking out, the gospel being proclaimed to the nations. The entire book of Acts is the story of a finite frame being replaced with an infinite one. You will be empowered to be whose witnesses? Jesus Christ's witnesses. Jesus' witnesses. There's no brands in heaven. No brands. I don't even have a logo for our church yet. But you know what? It's not eternal. You will be my witnesses because the church universal bears witness to the Christ. So my closing prayer and thought is this. May we become the evidence of eternity. Amen.